Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and today we are going to be talking about the quick draft season for Foundations, which at the time of recording is going to be starting tomorrow. Because the nature of Foundations is a very different one, we are going to be changing the nature of the conversation today. But before we get into all that, I'm sure you know that the 5-year foundation set in Standard is going to change a lot of things, not just in Standard, but in particular for budget and free-to-play players. What you may not know is you can make a big impact around here by making a funding choice through our Patreon, whether you're just helping keep the lights on every month, or you're making contributions towards specific content or hardware upgrades. Just know all the Patreon funding goes back into the community. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Alright, so this is usually the part where I would talk in the video about my personal evaluation system and the ratings that I give each deck. But that is for sets that are going to have a normal period in Standard and probably a fairly narrow window of focus as a Standard Archetype or a very short-lived draft environment. The main thing that is going to make Foundations unique from a drafting perspective is the fact that it's going to be in Standard for a little over 5 years. So really, at some point in time, every single one of these draft archetypes is very likely to be the correct choice. It's just a matter of time. So gathering those resources when you have the opportunity is really the correct choice, regardless of which direction that is taking at any given moment. So rather than focusing on what are the good, bad, and ugly choices of these archetypes, instead I'm going to be talking about how accessible each one of these archetypes is for us as budget players. Because of course Foundations didn't just give us draft as a resource. We also got starter decks and of course jump-in packs as well. So factoring all those things in and figuring out which are the easy low-hanging fruit and which may be the more difficult ones to come up with good decks is probably the correct focus for us as free-to-play and budget players. Now, virtually any arena player would expect that the Foundation starter preview decks that we just recently received should be a one-for-one conversion of the draft archetypes because, well, isn't that what they expect us to do, is draft and then build decks like these? But the fact of the matter is that about 6 of these decks do a really bang-up job of being very nearly a one-to-one conversion. But some of them, like Path of Power, for instance, come really close but don't quite get there. The blue-black graveyard deck, the white-green +1 counters matter deck, and the blue-green ramp deck all miss by about half, meaning that about half the cards in these decks don't necessarily contribute to what we're told should be the draft archetype. Believe it or not, the jump-in pack selections for Foundations from this particular perspective can be even more nebulous, mostly because only 5 of the 2 color combinations even exist. And of those, only 2 make good conversions to the draft archetype, that being the blue-white flyers and, once again, the white-green counters deck. Now, red-green power matters as well as the blue-black graveyard deck make pretty admirable effort, and the BR raid misses about as much as it hits, so kind of an odd mix there. 5 of the remaining 6 jump-in offerings are monocolor, well, tribal decks, ranging from rabbits, cats, goblins, elves, zombies, and of course the final jump-in pack is a Draw 2 Matters deck that, well, almost doesn't exist within Foundations. I'm not really sure how you build around it, but I have a feeling that maybe it's a plant for a future set. Getting back to those tribal offerings, the cats, elves, and zombies are all pretty strongly supported within the starter collection. Rabbits and goblins offerings are a little less supported, but substantial enough to be interesting. In a way, this creates multiple hidden, if you would, tribal draft archetypes, although, to be honest, it virtually requires getting a lucky pack one, pick one of the right rare in order to build around it successfully. However, it is possible. In fact, I recently did this with elves to great success, and actually did a piece about it, how you take that lucky draft and turn it into a constructed worthy deck. When we compile these various data observations, a picture of accessibility for various archetypes really begins to emerge, with blue-white flyers having a nearly perfect accessibility, the black-red raiders and red-green power matters being just slightly behind. On the other end of the spectrum, the blue-red spells, black-green morbid, and finally the blue-green ramp, all kind of ending up at the lower end of the spectrum. And of course, that leaves the white-black life, the blue-black graveyard, the white-red aggro deck, and the white-green +1 counters deck being kind of in the middle of the spectrum. Now, what this really means to us as free-to-play players is the more accessible the cards are, the more quickly we can expect to have a reasonably viable deck added to our arsenal, at least beyond the starter decks that, well, we were flat out granted. Also, more access to cards means we are more likely to get those lucky pulls that help us push a deck from reasonably playable to, well, fairly good. And, well, isn't that really what we're after? I believe it's also worth noting that two of the new Foundation starter decks hybridize particularly well with the summer starter decks that we received at the beginning of the 2025 season. We will be doing separate content on each of those decks and show you kind of an optimized day one list for those two color pairs. Additionally, I think it's worth keeping in mind that the expectation here is, because of Foundation's long-term nature in Standard, it's very likely that we will continue to see periodic Premier and Quick drafting well beyond the typical Foundation season, which is expected to end in early February. I will not be surprised if we see opportunity to draft this limited environment 2 or 3 times a year, or maybe as much as continuously in the case of quick drafts. Wouldn't that be nice? A quick draft environment that's always there, or maybe on some sort of 3-set rotation where you have a new set, you have Foundations, and then you have an old set. Many things could be options. I'm not really sure what direction they're going to take on this, but again, don't be surprised if we see Foundations as a limited archetype much longer than expected. For that reason, I will continue to talk about these draft archetypes periodically when we introduce new sets for our budget shop talk videos, talking about which ones are moving up in relative value and which ones are moving down. And if you're looking for specific tips on tackling the Foundation's draft archetypes as a quick drafter, I will be releasing my notes over on Patreon first thing Friday morning. That's available to the initiate level and above, and you'd be amazed at just how much value you get for just $1 a month. So those are my thoughts on the Foundation's draft archetypes, at least in the short term, and how I plan to approach doing those drafts moving forward. And this is your opportunity to get down in the comments and let me know what you think. And before we go, while every member of this community is important to me, I just wanted to take a moment and give a shout out to those patrons providing financial support and keeping the Stronghold from being a complete financial black hole. And of course, let me leave you with some suggestions for your next step here on the channel.